Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, where we will be reviewing how Governor Newsom's recent stay-at-home order impacts commercial property owners and managers. My name is Aaron Taxi, and I am BOMA GLA's Director of Government and Public Affairs. Last Thursday, our Governor, Gavin Newsom, issued a stay-at-home order, an attempt to contain the spread of the COVID-19 coronavirus. This order requires Californians only venture out of their homes to conduct essential tasks and businesses, and that local businesses only remain in operation if they are deemed quote unquote essential. To help you understand what the governor's executive order means for commercial office buildings, we are thrilled to welcome Matthew Hargrove, who is Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at the California Business Properties Association. In that capacity, Matthew has been BOMA's lead advocate in Sacramento since 2007. Over the past week and a half, his advocacy to the governor and legislature has been essential to ensuring that buildings can continue to operate safely and effectively through the duration of this crisis. Matthew will be giving a run-through of recent statewide actions. He also has seen the questions many of you submitted in advance and will answer them to the best of his abilities. For those of you who submitted questions requesting legal advice, we will be hosting 2 webinars next week to help give you some clarity. I will provide more details about those webinars at the conclusion of this session. We are going to pass the reins to Matthew in just a few minutes. But before we do, I want to welcome a few surprise guests who are joining us from Washington, D.C., our colleagues in the senior leadership of BOMA International. With the federal relief package navigating its way to being finalized, they have been on the front lines to ensure that the needs of building owners and managers are factored in. To provide a federal update, we are pleased to welcome BOMA International CEO and COO Henry Chamberlain, their Vice President of Advocacy, Codes, and Standards, John Bryant, their Director of Federal Affairs, Emily Naden, and their Director of State and Local Affairs, Ken Rosenfeld. With that, I will hand things off to John Bryant from BOMA International to kick things off.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate the introduction. And I know you have a lot on your call. We've been talking to Matthew Hargrove really on a daily basis, it seems like, for the past couple of weeks. The first thing we want to throw out there is to let you know that coronavirus and what we can do for you is 100% of our activities right now with BOMA International. So my team, everyone that's going to speak with you today, is going to kind of give you just a preview of some of the things we've been working on. But I want you to know that creating resources, guides, information, connecting you to your state and local officials, federal officials, that's exactly what we're trying to do and put together for you. If you hadn't had the opportunity, I encourage you to go to our BOMA.org website and look at our coronavirus resources. We have 3 guides that we put up there. One of them, I believe, just went up today, which is the tenant FAQ, which will answer a lot of questions, hopefully, that your tenants are asking of you. But we're also working with Department of Homeland Security, the CDC, the World Health Organization, basically everybody that's involved with kind of combating coronavirus. We're trying to make sure that the commercial real estate voice is represented. A lot of things that we're looking at, a lot of things that we're doing. I think essential personnel from the state perspective is the big one, as we're seeing these forced closures and mandated stay-at-home requests. Exactly what does that mean? There's a lot of questions right now on certificates of who can get out, and even if you're seeing essential personnel, what do you need in order to make sure that you can get to your destination safely and back without being stopped by any sort of authorities? We're trying to work out those issues. And in the midst of it all, we have a $2 trillion package that the federal government's been putting together, that we've been trying to make sure that, again, commercial real estate is represented in whatever package comes out. I do want to caution everyone to not think that this is the federal government response. It is the current federal government response. And while $2 trillion sounds like a ton of money, it is. It's the most this government has ever spent on an issue before. It's going to be probably just sticking your finger in the dam at this point. We may have a week or 2 reprieve, but then we're going to got to go back to dam designs and try to figure out exactly what we can do to help our members. Broad picture, there's some great things that are in this bill that I think will directly affect commercial real estate owners and managers. a lot of the conversations, I think most of them around rent abatement. This is a solution, not the solution, but a solution to really help small businesses ensure that they have access to money in the terms of loans, which can actually be converted to grants to pay for payroll and rent. But I'm going to turn it over to Emily in a minute, which can give you kind of a blow-by-blow and a play-by-play of what's included in the federal bill. And then we'll have Ken talk about some of what's happening around the country to just kind of give you a preview of what other local associations and members are kind of looking at. Before I turn it over to them, though, Henry, if you could kind of give us maybe a couple words on everything else that we're working on BOMA International. It's, like I said, all coronavirus all the time, a lot of hours we're putting in, but the one thing we want to convey to you is if you need our help, if you need information, this is exactly what we're set up in here to do for you. So please let us know how we can continue to help you. So Henry, I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll give it to the team to give them some more information.
Yeah, so thank you, John, and thanks for including me this afternoon, everybody. The work you're doing there in LA and in California is incredible. We're going through a very tough time, obviously. There's a lot of support around the country. John referenced that, but from Seattle to Chicago to New York to Houston, we are all working together on a lot of different things, from best practices and guidance, but also learning from the experiences that's going on as we play out, some scenarios on a lot of different things that are impacting us immediately. Last week, obviously, essential personnel was something we were trying to help folks define. John was talking about stay at home. That's playing out across the country. That's something that we've been able to do collectively. There are issues around cleaning in buildings and potentially increasing crime, an issue that we'll be watching. Obviously, labor law. New York, Chicago, and others are dealing with labor law and sick leave and all the rest. All of these issues are things that are being dealt with around the country, expertise and insights that we're going to be sharing over time. So you have your professional staff in DC. We're going to certainly talk about that today, but we've got some great staff resources around the country for folks that are really on the front lines on a lot of it, including our local group here in town. As John also alluded to, we're partnering with federal government, obviously working Capitol Hill, but a lot of the other real estate groups, which you do there in California, we are plugged in with everybody as a partnering group. So our whole role here is to be a resource, help us get through this, do it in the best way possible, and let's build back business as quickly as we can out the other side of this. So a lot going on, but whatever you need that we can provide from BOMA International in Washington, we're going to do. I know you're all very interested in the legislation, Emily being our expert in federal affairs. So Emily, let me kick it over to you.
Thank you, Henry. I appreciate that. So as you guys may have heard, there are some things going on in Congress. Let's talk about what the president's done first, and then we'll move on to the legislative branch. So starting, well, actually in January, there was a public health emergency declared, which sent a whole bunch of funds to Health and Human Services to basically kind of see how we can contain this. Unfortunately, more action was needed. So on March 13th, some executive actions were taken. The president invoked the Stafford Act, which declares a federal state of emergency, and that frees up about $50 billion in funds to combat virus response-related issues without needing the governors requesting one. He actually declared a total country state of emergency as opposed to per state. It's important to note that the Stafford Act only deals with FEMA, but the president has other tools at his disposal if he chooses to enact them. The Defense Production Act, there's been a little questions of if this was invoked or not, but what that does, we believe it has been, and it will be used to make an additional 60,000 virus kits. This is a Korean War era law that gives the government broad authority to control the entire supply chain, including forcing companies to manufacture critically needed items. So that's an important tool. One that has not been invoked, but is still potentially out in the president's toolbox is the National Emergencies Act. It unlocks sweeping presidential powers, including the ability to seize control of the internet or suspend laws. While President Trump is not yet talking about pulling an Abraham Lincoln and suspending habeas corpus, I just wanted you all to know what kind of his availability is out there. Also, last week, President Trump, at the request of Governor Gavin Newsom, declared a major disaster in California, making the state eligible for more resources to fight the escalating coronavirus in the state. As of now, the National Guard has been called in due to that major disaster and is already establishing additional hospitals, adding 2,000 beds to California in preparation for more COVID-19 infections. So Congress and the president have been working together to try and hash out what the best potential response is due to this, massive health and economic crisis we're now in. So 2 out of at least 3, probably 4 to 5 of the initial round of response bills have passed Congress and have been signed. As John mentioned, this is these 3 that we're hearing, these trillions of dollars, this is an initial volley. There will be more. The third is being negotiated as we speak. Let's talk about the first. The first was a mere $8.3 billion splash in the bucket to help the Secretary of Health and Human Services, as well as state and local health departments, to vaccines and medicine, as well as quote unquote international activities to basically help curb the spread of the virus abroad and prevent it from coming to the US. That was signed into law on March 6th. Second, phase 2, or the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which was signed into law last week, is the one you may have heard a lot about. It is estimated to cost around $104 billion over the next 10 years, and it applies to companies with more than 50 and less than 500 workers. It requires those companies to pay out 2 weeks of paid sick leave, plus allows for an additional 10 weeks for family and medical leave at 2/3 pay, for workers who are ill or quarantined, or for people whose family members were exposed, or for anyone who faces childcare issues because all the schools are closed. That's going to apply to most people who work at companies that size. The daily rate is capped for paying them at $511 per day for the sick time, if you're actually sick, and $200 per day for other time. Now, if you're an employer, don't freak out. We've also included a very generous tax credit in there that will make you whole. So if you pay out any of those sick or family leave times, there is a tax credit equivalent to what you pay out. And when you file quarterly, you'll be eligible to get that back. So you should be made whole. The bill also expands unemployment insurance by $1 billion. We play with unemployment insurance again in the third bill we'll talk about in just a second. Under the bill, this second bill, healthcare workers and emergency responders were exempt. So if you are running a hospital system, for example, those healthcare workers are exempt from that paid leave. And these requirements, don't worry, this was not a forever mandate, will expire on December 31st, 2020. So the third one, this is kind of what's making the news right now, as if not everything is making the news right now. The third bill, we are expecting passage this afternoon, but some things have held it up. This is HR 748, Corona Aid, Relief and Economic Security Act, or CARES. We really like our acronyms in Washington, so hang on tight for all the next ones coming. At 1 a.m. this morning, negotiators finally cleared the final hurdle on Capitol Hill, and the Senate was hoping to pass the bill today. And then the House, once the Senate passes it, probably tonight, will hopefully find a way to pass it. They're currently in recess, so they actually need, Speaker Pelosi needs all 435 of them to unanimously consent. We're not really sure how that's going to work. There's a potential for a workaround on that, but that's how it will happen. For businesses, this bill could provide up to $300 billion in loans. I say could because it hasn't passed yet. We have the text, but nothing's done until the lady has sung. For small businesses, there's going to be some short-term loans, and it includes $150 billion for state and locals, a lot of money for hospitals, and they beefed up that unemployment insurance again. That will give Americans 4 months worth of their income if you're furloughed or lose your job due to the coronavirus. Everyone here works in properties, but everyone here is also a person. So I'm going to tell you the cash payments to each American in the total of $1,200 per adult, plus $500 per kiddo, with an income cutoff at $75,000 per individual and $150 per joint income are also included. If you have done your direct deposit for 2019, it will be based off of your adjusted gross income. How many of you have just left this Zoom to go figure out what your AGI was? I'll wait. Just kidding. But more importantly for BOMA, this bill includes our top legislative priority, a technical correction fixing the qualified improvement property error, which will allow BOMA members, as well as restaurant and retail, to fully expense their improvements until 2022. And they can go back and amend their returns, because this should have happened for 2018 and 2019. So this will bring a lot of your building trades back into the job market, and this will hopefully help float everyone a little better as soon as we can all get back to work. The bill also includes a $5,000 refundable tax credit for retaining employees that is not just limited to small business. And this is a big thing, because there have been a lot of layoffs, people thinking it will help folks to go get unemployment if they can't be paid. This is a refundable tax credit, and it'll provide up to 50% of $10,000 in wages paid to employees from March 13th last week through the end of the year, if you are severely affected by coronavirus or closure due to coronavirus. There are a bunch of caveats that make sure it's not being abused, and it cannot be combined with other loan or credit programs that are like the small business loans that are happening per this big bill. But it's a way to keep your employees. So again, there's going to be lots of emergency grants, as well as small relief for small business owners. Even if you work for a large commercial real estate company, this will help your tenants stay afloat. So it matters to us not only what happens in the industry itself, but if we don't have any tenants, there's no one to have an industry for. So this is very helpful. If you are on the accounting side, there's a few fun nuggets for you as well. We can talk about, BOMA will have a fairly comprehensive kind of outline ready, hopefully by the end of the week. And we also have advocacy news going out today. So if you want more of the accounting stuff, that'll be in there as well. In addition to all those efforts, stumping on Capitol Hill, making calls, because you can't go up there right now. We've also asked the Treasury and the IRS for an extension. If any of you are in the 1031 or like kind exchange business, they have very strict timelines. We've asked them for an extension to those timelines so that no one's kind of left holding the bag. And on top of all of this, also in the accounting realm, you may have already heard about extensions about filing tax deadlines, and there's a ton of confusion, but the IRS just released some regulations today, so I'm also happy to share those if anyone is interested. I am easily found on the BOMA website, and you can reach out to me whenever you like. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope this helps. I hope everyone stays safe and healthy.
Thanks. This is Ken, and always hard to follow Emily with all of that content. Let me try to finish off the BOMA International portion of today's call with a little perspective on the state and local perspective, what's going on across the country, and what we're working on with all of our local associations. Of course, a lot of attention, as there should be, on all the national statistics, everything that's going on in DC with the federal government. But in most ways, this issue is being fought, for better or worse, at the state and local level. So let me start by saying a lot of credit is due, a lot of thanks are due to BOMA California, all the BOMA local associations in California, as well as across the country. This is such a difficult time. There's so much going on in our industry and with our associations. But it's really been nothing short of spectacular to see how the local associations have rallied to engage on this issue, to prepare members. And with so many issues going on, advocacy is a big piece of what's going on. So I just want to mention from that perspective, certainly the number one issue, and John had mentioned this up front, is defining essential personnel, right? So who, as we have more orders, more shelter in place, more stay-home orders, who's going to be essential and be able to get into work. California, as is so often the case, of course, was among the first to issue these, both in the Bay Area and then statewide. Hopefully, Matthew will tell you it's still been helpful to have the interaction among all of the locals across the country, because everybody's been coordinating. All of the BOMA local associations have been talking to each other, sharing ideas, sharing best practices we're using. And we're trying to really be a clearinghouse and try to get you all the resources that you need so you can do what you need to do at the state and local level. We did release a document for all of the local associations to use, so a bit of a behind the scenes document on essential personnel, so that as state and local BOMAs get to work trying to advocate on the issue, trying to reach out to governors and mayors and councils, they had some of this information at their fingertips. So I think that's been useful. It's included, again, lots of sample language on how essential personnel has been defined, as well as including links to the latest shelter-in-place orders, as well as a link to U.S. Department of Homeland Security guidance. DHS has put out advisory guidance, which includes identifying commercial facilities as essential and critical infrastructure. So it's very important, even though that's just advisory, we're getting that stamp of approval from the federal government as well. That issue is now starting to morph across the country, and it concerns about access and credentialing. Seems like we're not there yet. Most markets would be interesting if any of you have a different perspective, but there hasn't really been a crackdown on access yet. There have just been orders to stay at home, but there hasn't really been that level of enforcement that we can guess is probably going to be the next stage of this. As the numbers go up, as the number of cases go up, there's probably going to be more enforcement, and it's going to be really important, essential, you could say, to make sure that building personnel can get to their properties. So we're going to stay on top of that issue. We've been talking to the DHS regularly. We're going to continue sharing information across all the states. I do want to quickly mention, if you haven't already visited, please do go to the BOMA International website. We have a coronavirus resource page, boma.org/coronavirus. John had mentioned up front 3 guidance documents we have to provide the latest and best guidance from CDC and others that affects our industry. So please check out those 3 documents. We have other links and resources for all sorts of perspectives on this issue. We have links to webinars from some of our local associations across the country. So plenty of similar issues everyone's working on. So again, we want to learn from each other. BOMA International is also hosting a webinar tomorrow on building operations. So feel free to check out that. And we're going to continue to find what we can provide to help you all do what you're doing so well. So again, I just want to say thank you to BOMA California and Rex and Matthew for all the great work they've done and being a fantastic example for the rest of the country as well, and to Michelle and Aaron and all the locals in California. And please know we really appreciate everything y'all are doing for your properties and your members. Let us know how we can help. And please continue to rely on the BOMA local associations who are really doing some impressive work. And with that, I'll hand this back off to Matthew to talk about the specifics in California.
Great, thank you very much. And you know, this is a mutual admiration society because the folks at BOMA International have done a fantastic job. This has been very odd for all of us. We are all, none of us are going to work or going outside, and this is very strange times. But for how strange these times are, it's been very odd how well the government response has actually come together, that the government has actually been listening to industry in this area. I know both at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level where I'm working in my hometown, folks have been very receptive to a lot of our ideas and asked for help. So it might sound very odd to say this in the middle of a worldwide pandemic where folks feel like they're somewhat under martial law, but things seem to be working. The mechanisms that are in place, and some of them that have been made up to deal with this on the fly, seem to be working. And as somebody who's worked in and around government for 25 years, it's kind of nice to see. From the BOMA California perspective, we got pulled into this very early on. And those of you who are in California know that our legislators are very proactive on a lot of things. At least they like to put out press releases and start getting credit for stuff. So before some of the shutdowns were even happening, actually before the shutdowns were even happening, we got notice from some legislators that they were looking at putting in a bill into the legislature that would stop evictions once shutdown started happening. And that pulled us into this conversation very quickly. The next day after we got that notification is when the 6 counties in the Bay Area actually did shut down. So it made that conversation very, very real. The first thing that we did as your representatives is talk to all of you and said, hey, what do you actually do in a situation like this? We know we've never had a pandemic shutdown before, but we have had huge recessions. We've had other things that have had big impacts on buildings and tenants. So we went out to our membership and said, what do you do to retain tenants in something like this? The reason we did that is because we wanted to provide legislators who have never worked in commercial real estate in any way, shape, manner, or form a good sense of what you all do to make sure that your tenants are happy and healthy. Speaking on the commercial side specifically, a lot of legislators don't understand the symbiotic relationship that you have with your tenants because of the amount of time and effort that you put into tenant improvements, recruiting the right tenants, getting the right mix of tenants. We don't have any incentive, we don't have any desire to all of a sudden pull the stop lever and start kicking out tenants. So that was the first thing we did, was started explaining to legislators the many different things that you do, just from simple forbearance to actually renegotiating loans and pushing off payments to the latter parts of leases. So that was all very helpful, thank you. And that was eye-opening for the legislators. The next day, we heard that the governor was actually starting to put together a statewide executive order. And that somewhat worried us because having a statewide executive order with a new governor where it doesn't have any past track record of working with us on something like this, we didn't know what was going to come out. So we did everything possible to work with the legislators, work with his staff, get him information about how commercial real estate would deal with such an executive order. At first, the governor's office was potentially not going to include commercial in that order, and that would have had pluses and minuses. Ultimately, the executive order that was released did include both residential and commercial, and as you know, does not waive rent. It says it delays rent up until May 31st, 2020. We do think that might get changed at some point, and we also know there's a lot of local governments who are going above and beyond that executive order. Though that executive order we were happy with for a number of reasons. One, just practically, is it put some framework and some bumpers on the amount of time that the state said that this type of rent moratorium could happen. It also set the tone at the state level, put something in writing for local governments to follow. And up to this point, with all the local governments that have adopted it, most of them have pretty much mirrored what the governor did, and that's a good thing. The other big issue here was how do we as an industry respond to this? And we had an emergency call with all of our leadership. BOMA Cal was on the line. And as an industry, we came to the conclusion that this was going to be painful in the short term, but that we felt that this was such an emergency issue, and that standing with the governor, standing with our tenants, and saying we commercial real estate are going to do everything we can do to get us through this crisis was the right decision to make. So we supported the governor. You can find the letter on our website. Actually, it's been emailed to most of you also. And we actually supported the BOMA California, the executive order that the governor put out on eviction moratoriums. Now, that's been helpful with a lot of you locally as you've been dealing with these eviction moratoriums, because it puts us in a place where folks are welcoming us to the table because we're coming to that table from a positive attitude of saying we need to help. And also, this is a long way of saying that everything that you just heard from the federal side of things were things that we were hoping would happen. We put some faith in the system. We put some faith in our own government, state government. We put faith in those of us who are representing us in the federal level and at the federal government, that folks would come together, recognize that this was a huge imposition, and put together the package that is being put together now. So we're very, very pleased and happy that that happened. But also, just as your representative on this and somebody who wakes up every morning with my own family, I thank you, the commercial real estate industry, for taking that position. It was the right thing to do, and I think that it's going to bear fruit just with within our own industry's place within the state and the federal government, but also help many of you with your tenants. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but that needs to be said. The governor then issued the statewide stay-at-home order, and this caused a lot of confusion. First of all, the order was very much informed by the conversation we were having with BOMA International at the time. They had already provided, we knew the governor was heading this direction, and BOMA International had provided us some guidance documents that had come out from the Department of Homeland Security. It's called the CISA document. That document is meant for essential workers during wartime, basically. If we're in an active war and we are actually in martial law, what are the most essential workers that should be out and about? A very generous reading of that CISA document covered most of the things within commercial real estate that we were asking for anyways. But we had also been prepared, and we're putting together a list that we ultimately provided to the governor. That list pulled things out of our own industry to say, if the governor is going to clarify anything within CISA, we need to make sure that things like building management staff, security staff, vendors coming in and out that have to do with security, engineering staff and vendors, the janitorial staff, all the folks who take care of all the mechanical issues in your building, fire safety folks, and construction could continue. So we provided that list to the governor, and it ultimately informed the decision. He put out the executive order and pointed only to the CISA document. But he also put a parenthetical on there and said that residential construction could also continue. Now, by him doing that, that caused some confusion on the commercial real estate side of things, because you know, as many of us, we look at these things very conservatively, and a lot of folks said, well, he pulled out residential, but he didn't specifically name commercial. That's an issue. So we had to go back, and we worked with the governor on putting together a California-specific list. At this point, we do believe that that list does cover all of the commercial construction issues. The governor himself said that a big piece of putting together the essential workers list and the essential buildings list was so the economy doesn't completely crater as we do this. Now, we do know that there are some local stay-at-home orders, especially the ones that happened before the governor's, well, all of them happened before the governor's order, that some are reading as being a little more strict than the California order. But at this point, we urge you, the San Francisco Bay Area one is one, to work with your local government and clarify it if you need to, but also understand that the statewide order does allow for commercial construction to happen. So if you're in the middle of TIs, those should be able to continue. Now, whether or not folks are showing up to work because they're scared about all this, or if they're confused or they're sick themselves, that's another question. We have not been getting many reports that TIs have been getting stopped at the local level. There are some issues with getting inspections and permits merely because the local government is overworked, and that's happening. I'm just real quickly going to hit some of the stuff that the governor announced today that the state's doing to augment the federal bill that's out there. So these are things that we want to make sure you know are happening. There's a lot of assistance coming your way. So please bear with all of this. Thank you, everyone, for doing everything you're doing. But we do believe that the short-term hit is ultimately going to be made up with some long-term infusions from the federal government and at the state level. There's been 1 million claims of unemployment since March 13th in California. That's massive. We haven't seen numbers like that in a long, long time. One of the things that the governor said that the state was doing today was going to augment the unemployment package at the federal level with $600 more per week for those who are put out of work due to this crisis. He stated flat out that there's a lot more support coming from the state for both individuals and businesses through this crisis. I just real quickly want to touch on the residential mortgage issue that he talked about today, but he announced that over 200 California-based banks and 4 of the 5 largest home loan institutions in the nation have agreed to a 90-day grace period for waiver of payment and penalties for your mortgage. So if you or any of your employees have been impacted by this in a way that you're worried about making your own residential mortgage, know that that the governor is specifically working with most likely whoever holds your note to help you through that. They're also working on doing things with the banks like waiving overdraft charges and late fees coming up. At the state level, we're already working with them on, the income tax announcement has been made at the federal and the state level that the income tax due date has been pushed off. Though if you can, do your taxes now and pay them. We're urging you to do that. We do need to make sure that our own government gets funded to help with a lot of this stuff. And we're working with them specifically on property taxes right now. We know the second payment of property taxes is due on April 10th, and that many of you might have cash flow issues right now. We don't have anything to announce on that except to let you know that folks at the highest level of California's government knows that the property tax issue is there. It's a little bit more complicated than the income tax issue because of the way those funds flow and what they fund. We're trying to work through it. At the very least, we're looking for the state to at least waive any penalties for late payment of property taxes. But again, nothing to report on that yet, except that it's being worked on your behalf. Some of you in Los Angeles will see a boat come into the LA port. It's the USS Mercy. They're bringing that in because the state is planning on a massive surge of need for hospital beds and ventilators. The governor believes even under the stay-at-home orders we have that the state is going to need upwards of 50,000 more hospital beds. 30,000 of those beds are coming from increases at your local hospitals. So thank those healthcare institutions if you can. But 20,000 of the beds are going to come from other facilities. Some of them might be your own facilities. We know lots of our members are already out there working with the state and local Office of Emergency Services on providing space for lots of different things that are needed. And the hotels and motels are also working with the state. There's already an entire hotel, I believe, in San Diego that's being converted over to serve as a temporary hospital. So we think that that's a big deal. And 24.2 million N95 masks have already been used. And that's a significant number, but the state has 100 million more of the masks coming in the next 2 days. So that's a big deal for any of you that have loved ones that are in the hospital or working in healthcare themselves. And then only as California can deal with a crisis like this, we have Sir Richard Branson's 747 is flying to Hong Kong and bringing back 100 million masks for us. Elon Musk is no longer making awesome cars, but he's now making awesome ventilators. Bloom Energy is also making ventilators, and Kaiser and a whole bunch of smaller medical labs in the state of California are working on doing more tests on this. That's a huge part of flattening this curve, is getting tests, getting early tests for folks so we can identify who has coronavirus. 53 lives have been lost in California so far. And the big number that needs to be stressed is that 37 people so far under the age of 17 have tested positive for coronavirus. So that means even those, your kids who are younger can catch this and bring it home to you. So be very, very careful. And 51% of those that have tested positive overall in the state of California are between the ages of 18 and 49. And as you know, those are the hardest to keep home, to keep from going out and hanging out in groups. But so that's a big number. The governor also addressed the statewide eviction moratorium issue today, and this is something that's important to all of you. The question is, will there be a statewide mandate on the eviction moratorium? Right now, your local government has to actually adopt something locally for that to happen in your city. The governor is getting pressure to do that on a statewide manner because two cities, one of them here by where I am, Elk Grove, have actually rejected adopting an eviction moratorium. And also there's concern that there's so many local governments are adopting something that's different than the jurisdiction right next door to them. There is starting to be concern that this has become a patchwork policy, and it might just be easier on our industry included if all local governments were operating under the same guidelines. And then, of course, we hope that those guidelines are very focused and keep many of the requirements that the current one has. So these are very, very complicated issues. This is a big deal. The good news is, as many of you know, the economy was roaring when this thing hit. Had this pandemic hit in the nadir of the recession, 12 years ago, it would be a lot different response. And there would be a lot more unknowns at this point. And we wouldn't have been able to have Henry and his crew on this line saying the cavalry's coming. So timing is everything. And if we're going to have a pandemic, having it in the middle of a economy that's on fire is better than not having it. I want to go to my friends at BOMA GLA and see if I should just start answering some of these questions that have been submitted, or I want to see if other folks that have been presenting want to jump in on anything before we start questions. No. All right. So I'm going to hit all of you. Thank you very much. Submitted questions. I'm going to, we're going to try and answer as many as we can. I need to say right up front that I am not a lawyer and that you should not depend on me for any legal advice. A lot of these questions we will be able to answer. There are some answers. Some answers are just not known yet, and I will do my best to make a guess. And some things are too complicated and or need to be worked with your legal counsel, and I will try and answer to the best of my ability. The first question is by remaining on site to handle the essential tenants, are we simultaneously putting the owner in jeopardy by possibly contaminating the building, opening us up later for lawsuits? I can't answer the last part. We're a very litigious society and we're a very litigious state. Building owners and managers, our service providers get sued a lot of times over a lot of different things. Many of them are very baseless. So you may be opening yourself up for a lawsuit. You may not. You may get sued even if you don't do some of this stuff. But in terms of being on site to handle your essential tenants, and for those of you who have buildings that might not have tenants in them anymore, but you just can't walk away from your building and you need your staff there, we ask that you look at the health requirements. There are standards out there. I'm going to use the general term social distancing for all of the health advice that's been out there, but you should be doing things like providing, making sure that you have hand washing stations if you have a construction site, that you have good soap in your bathrooms for your employees, that you're encouraging your employees to wash their hands a lot. Provide some hand sanitizer to them. All the things that many of you already were doing before this pandemic, just make sure you're doing that. Make sure that your staff, your janitorial staff, your admin staff in your building are following and complying with these. I'm not a health expert, but I do know that the health experts are telling us that there are things you can do to not get sick even when you're out in public, staying 6 feet away from people, washing your hands, not touching surfaces that are outside of your home. Do those types of things and to protect yourself. Question number 2, how are other California commercial retail building owners handling employees who are not essential during this time? Continue to pay, tell them to apply for unemployment. That's a very individualized question. I have heard from companies all over the map. I'll tell you, most of the companies that we've dealt with, though, have contingency on this. We have not heard mass layoffs within the building management and ownership community. I myself am working from home. I know the BOMA GLA folks are working from home. There's a lot of positions within the building industry where you don't have to be at the actual building to do that. So that question is all over the map. I would recommend that you look towards employer resources on this. On our website, we have a link to the California Chamber of Commerce, which has a lot of recommendations for you as employers. Things that you can tell your employees to look forward. Unemployment is one of them. Low interest loans, lots of different resources for employers. Go to the Cal Chamber website for those. It's under their COVID-19 page, and or work with your local chambers and your local associations at BOMA. There are resources coming. There'll be more resources coming too. Everything that Emily ticked off earlier is not going to show up on any of these websites yet, but by next week we'll have information out on them. Question number 3, will there be a universal response to California building owners should give to those wishing to forego or delay rents during this time? Again, that's a very individualized question depending on how you run your buildings, the types of leases you have, where your tenants are in those leases. I don't think that there is any statewide answer to this, though we at BOMA California are trying to put together, and hopefully we'll have this out by early next week, some ideas that building managers and building owners can do in working with tenants to get through this. And we hope to have that out shortly, though many of your companies are, again, already doing this type of thing before coronavirus hit. Many of you have tenants that have come to you in the past and said, I can't make rent this month, and you don't want to start a UD on them, and you work with them through their issues. Question number 4, this is a long one. At this time, many coworkers and building personnel have been pulled over and questioned by the police. I'm just going to stop there. I don't know the answer to this, and we haven't seen actual proof that folks are being pulled over in California. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but we've heard rumors, and we've asked for, let us know what jurisdiction has done that. There isn't a piece of paper right now from the state saying you're an essential worker. And to the extent that we have talked to folks that have talked with local law enforcement, the local law enforcement have told us over and over again, they are not pulling over people and asking if they're essential workers. Now, somebody might get pulled over because they have a broken taillight or their tags are wrong, and then asked what they're doing out. That's, police have said they're doing that. But folks aren't being pulled over and being asked to see papers if they're an essential worker or not. Again, if you have information that is actually happening, let us know as soon as possible, and we will get that information to the governor. But the direction that there's been no direction from the governor's office or from law enforcement to in any way be enforcing the essential workers thing. And there's so many people that fall within the essential workers category, it would be impossible. Question number 5 is, are there any records that we should be keeping during this pandemic for posterity, such as cleaning logs and landlord-tenant correspondence? The answer is yes. I would document everything you're doing. If you're doing extra cleanings, if you're doing deep cleanings, if you're running into the red with tenants, I would, we recommend that, yes, you should be documenting all of this, just as you would do under a normal course of matter, in terms of if you know a tenant is in trouble, things like that. You're going to want to keep records that show that you're working with that tenant. We don't know yet what will be exactly required in terms of a tenant telling you that they can't make the payment because of coronavirus. Hopefully there will be some guidance on that. There's none at the moment. We know that. We know that makes you nervous. By the same respect, though, you as landlords at some point are probably going to, well, let's hope you don't, but if you do, have to apply for some of the federal help or state assistance that's coming because you're so far into the red. You're probably going to be asked to justify how the coronavirus impacted you. So the answer is yes, you probably should be keeping track of that. Does tenant have the right to not divulge any potential cases within owner building? The answer to that is, I believe a tenant does not have to tell you if they're sick or if they have gotten coronavirus. But I also don't know. There are there's healthcare regulations that have to do with privacy. It's called HIPAA. I'm not an expert on that. But from what I do know coming through this the last couple of weeks in terms of the counties announcing cases on this, they are only giving, they're not giving names, they're only giving general locations, and that's because of the right to privacy. So, I mean, who knows if someone comes in your building and gets a bunch of folks sick, there might be some recourse there, but in terms of having to walk in and announce that they're sick, we don't see anything there. I'm going to give it a break for a second there. I want to let Aaron or anyone from GLA jump in here and see if you've seen any questions coming in online that I should be answering. Anyone still on the line? Is anyone hearing me?
We hear you, Matthew. We're just opening up the questions right now.
We have about 8 minutes left. I can keep going through here. We did get a lot of questions online too. I will do my best to, hopefully they don't disappear when we get off the line. I'll do my best to answer all of those that I can too.
Matthew, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I see one that falls right into my wheelhouse, if that's all right.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily. I need a second.
Matt Meter asked if, can I go into more detail about the ability to fully expense improvements in the CARE Act? Yes. So if you are a BOMA follower, hope you are, we've been following what used to be referred to as leasehold depreciation. And as of the 2017 tax bill has been renamed Qualified Improvement Property, QIP, for those of you following at home. QIP was an error. If you, for a decade, BOMA fought leasehold improvement property to lower the depreciation, or sorry, to speed up the depreciation to 15 years from a abominable 39. If you've ever seen 39-year-old carpet, you will agree with our stance. We finally achieved success in 2015. And leasehold depreciation was made permanent at 15 years. That got screwed up by accident in a late night drafting of the 2017 massive tax reform bill. They basically combined us with a bunch of other types of properties, renamed it, and forgot to specify a depreciation period or class life. So we went back to 39 years overnight. But the good news is not only has that been fixed, and it was a free fix because it was done, it was scored by the Joint Tax Committee as if it was done correctly. More importantly, because we're now 15-year property, anything under 20-year property gets to be fully expensed, which is basically you write off that TI against your net operating income for until 2022. So I hope that answers the question. If you're familiar with leasehold, that's basically it. Instead of 15 right now, you're at 100% expensing on your TI. So mazel tov.
Yeah. I'm going to hit 3 more questions here that look like they're within my wheelhouse, which is very general and political. A lot of these questions are really good questions, but they really need to be directed to whoever you work with on leasing, maybe your counsel. And a lot of the questions are going to be different depending on how your company does your leases, what the leases look like in these buildings. There might be, there might be ways to share some of this burden with your tenants. I mean, you all know better than anyone. There's 82 different ways to write a lease in the state of California. So what works with one lease and with one tenant isn't going to work with another. And that's the beauty and the horror of the commercial real estate industry is we have lots of different ways to do everything, but then also that makes it very difficult to have one way to do anything. So the last couple questions that I want to just quickly address is, what is the outlook of insurance companies recognizing this pandemic as a business interruption with regard to loss in rent? That is a very, very good question. I can't believe it fell all the way down to number 10. That was actually one of our first responses back to the state of California when we knew that they were looking at doing the eviction moratorium, was asking the state to figure out what, if anything, it can do to assure that tenants are using insurance coverage if they can. And then the answer came back to us pretty quickly that there was a lot of insurance out there that actually did not cover virus or pandemic. And one of the things we've asked the state to look into, we don't have any idea if this actually can or will happen. We know the feds are being asked the same thing though, is to look at ways to work with the insurance industry to allow insurance to do its work and cover some of this stuff, even if it wasn't initially covered. I haven't heard anything from Emily that is in any of these 4 bills that are out there, but we do know there's going to be a lot more work on these types of policies in the coming month or so. So we know there's a lot of different types of insurance that potentially will cover this or couldn't cover this if they get the backing from the state or the feds. That question is being put to the insurance industry and to the government, but don't have anything to report on that at the time being. And then the final question is it better to wait on response to tenants when asking for rent abatements to see how this all pans out? Again, my answer to you is going to be political. It's not going to be the business answer. You might have a different business answer, but from an industry at this point, this early on in the pandemic, is we're hoping for the best and preparing for the worst. We hope that everything we're doing right now keeps the deaths in California very, very low, and we're all out of our houses in a couple weeks. And actually, I hope that we keep the numbers so low that we look back on all this and maybe have in the back of our mind, did we overreact? Because that will mean we didn't turn into Italy. That's the worst case scenario. Everything we're doing is so we don't become Italy and become overwhelmed. So as a piece of that, again, politically, our recommendation is at this point, knowing how much money is coming into the state, how many different politicians and how many different policymakers are looking to make sure that the economy gets back to that state of roaringness as soon as this is over. Remember, this is also an election year. That our recommendation at this point is to do everything you can up front to work with your tenants and get through this. Now, that's going to look really different for all of your companies. But, our position as an industry is that we're doing what we can to get through this and get the economy back and running as soon as possible. Having a bunch of, increase in the amount of space available in the state of California isn't going to do that, and your own tenant relations may suffer because of that. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. We hope this was helpful. We really appreciate it. There's a lot of unknown answers out there. We know that. We're doing everything we can to shape some of the stuff. Right now, we're in the honeymoon. Everyone's really pitching in and pulling together on this. A month from now, there might be severely pitched political battles. We hope that doesn't happen, but we're also realistic. So stay tuned, stay positive, help your tenants, work with your tenants, social distance, wash your hands, enjoy some time at home with your kids.
Well, thank you very much for that, Matthew. And thank you as well to everyone from BOMA International for your thorough presentation. We appreciate everyone who took the time to log on to today's webinar. This webinar has been recorded and will be distributed to your local BOMAs soon, and we will be distributing to our membership. We will also be resending a list of essential businesses to our members, which we had initially sent last week after LA County made its safer at home order. Things are changing by the day at the federal, state, and local levels, and I just want everyone here to know that BOMA GLA is here as a resource for you. You can email me anytime at ataxi@bomagla.org with questions you might have. If you are dialing in from another local BOMA, I hope that you are in touch with your leadership. BOMA is on the front line for advocacy on behalf of building owners and managers at every level of government. Also, although we are not able to meet in person for a bit, BOMA GLA is continuing to provide you with valuable content and resources to navigate the COVID-19 crisis and be in a better position to return to business as usual when that time comes. Our online webinar series continues next week. Next Tuesday, March 31st, we will be hosting a webinar on negotiating rent deferral agreements with your tenants, featuring Tiffany Trung with the law firm Kimball, Tyree, and St. John. And then next Thursday, April 2nd, we will be having another webinar on California contractual enforceability issues arising in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis with Kathy Moses and Alicia Vaz, both attorneys at Cox, Castle, and Nicholson. We're hoping that both of these will help answer a lot of the legal questions that have arisen over the past couple weeks for you. If you go to our events page at bomagla.org, you can register for these webinars and many more upcoming online programs. Lastly, I would like to encourage everyone on this session to go to our COVID-19 resource hub at bomagla.org for additional material to help you understand how to navigate this challenging time. Thank you again for joining, and I look forward to seeing you on another webinar very soon.